And then I lived in China for 6 years. I lived in Shanghai. And that was the first time that I really woke up to environmental impact. I mean, I had sort of intellectually thought about it before, but it hadn't struck me. But then in China, before my eyes, I saw the implications of 1 billion people wanting what Americans have effectively. I saw the laying down of freeways, the purchasing of cars, the changes in animal consumption, from a largely vegetarian culture with a little bit of meat occasionally to meat heavy, and all the implications for animal welfare. And something in me fundamentally changed.
Welcome to Inspire Someone Today podcast, a show where we dive into the stories and insights that has the power to create ripples of inspiration in your life. I'm your host Shrikant, and I'm thrilled to be with you on this journey of inspiration. Hey my dear listeners, welcome back to yet another episode of Inspire Someone Today, wherein we get inspirers who are shaping the world order and at the same time who are inspiring through their word, through their work and through their activities. Joining me today is a acclaimed leader. Lorna Davis is a prominent business executive known for her leadership in the food and beverage industry, particularly in the areas of sustainability and social responsibility. She is an advocate of sustainable and ethical business practices, often speaking at conferences and events to promote the importance of corporate responsibility. Lorna is recognized for her expertise in sustainable business practices and transforming business to be more environmentally conscious and socially responsible. Her TED Talk has garnered over 2.6 million views so far, and it's my absolute joy and pleasure to have Lorna joining us to this episode of Inspire Someone Today. Thanks for joining us, Lorna.
Thanks, Shri. Good to be here.
So, Lorna, from your work profile standpoint, you are someone who has worked in 7 different countries, 5 continents, left South Africa at a very early age, 20 plus, and there is no looking back from there on. Walk us through how this whole career journey gets started and to be where you are today, having those many years of experience behind you. How was this journey like? What was the ingredients of this journey? And looking back, what are the things that kind of comes to your mind as great memories, great learnings?
Wow, that's a big question. So let me see. Of course, when we tell the story of our lives, we tell it differently every time because our histories are, inventions of our imagination, really. We just pick some bits and drop other bits. But I will tell you how it looks to me today. So in my 20s, I'm a white South African and I grew up in apartheid South Africa. And of course, there's a lot to say about that. But one of the things that was true for me in that country was the media in those days was completely controlled by the government. And I remember early on this sort of itch, this desperation to get out of the country, to just see the world. I didn't expect to never come back. I did the kinds of things that people did in those days. I got a round the world ticket and I went backpacking. And then a year later, I found myself in Australia. And I had been working at that time. I had been the brand manager for what was then called Olive Olay, which is now called Olay. And it was owned by a company before Procter. And I called them up and said, I don't suppose you have a job. I'm South African and I used to run the business in South Africa. And long story short, they gave me a job. They got me a visa. And from then on, really, my life was a series of, I think, seeking myself, seeking validation, seeking power, seeking success, seeking happiness. At another level, seeking adventure, excitement. And, when you are in multinational corporate companies, organizations, once you've demonstrated that you're willing to travel and willing to relocate, you basically get on a track. And it's 3 years here, and then they send you to the next country, and it's 3 or 4 years there, then they send you to the next country. And so, in a way, that's what happened to me. And I just kept climbing the ladder. And then, as you say, I've lived in many countries and on 5 continents. And I think I didn't really question the structure of my seeking until I got to China. And then I lived in China for 6 years. I lived in Shanghai. And that was the first time that I really woke up to environmental impact. I mean, I had sort of intellectually thought about it before, but it hadn't struck me. But then in China, before my eyes, I saw the implications of 1 billion people wanting what Americans have effectively. I saw the laying down of freeways, the purchasing of cars, the changes in animal consumption, from a largely vegetarian culture with a little bit of meat occasionally to meat heavy, and all the implications for animal welfare. And something in me fundamentally changed. And from then on, the trajectory of my life was different. And it was a sort of an attempt. It has been an attempt since then. So that's sort of 12 years ago that I left China, an attempt to sort of help business to pivot to being more, as you said in your intro, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, and more social justice oriented. Very long answer to the question, but it was a big question, Shri.
It was a big question. Thank you for taking that question head on. And in this whole journey, I think there was this whole moment of you going through the whole sustainability chain, but also from a leadership lesson standpoint, looking back, what were those things that really shaped you to be the person that you are, both professionally as well as personally?
So I think the most significant single impact on me was the exposure to different cultures. People often ask me for advice, and I don't like giving advice because, as a good friend of mine says, when you are off balance, you can't take the advice. And when you're back in balance, you don't need the advice. But the one thing that I encourage young people to do is to go and live somewhere that they don't come from for at least a year. And, in some cases, that's another country. In countries like this country or the country that you're in, you can just go to another part of that very large country. So, if you live in New York City, you go and live in Alabama for a year. If you live in Bangalore, you go and live in Rajasthan for a year. And you see that people are different, that they interact with themselves and the world that they're in differently. And I think what happened is that because I was going from country to country, I saw that all of the assumptions that I grew up with around humans and how they are were not true. People are all different. I remember, for example, when I got to Australia, I had one of those things that they do in companies where they do 360-degree feedback and they ask people what they think of you. And then there's this big moment where somebody tells you, some consultant tells you what people said. And they said to me, "You are harsh and impatient, and actually we're scared of you." I remember that. And I was in my late 20s, and I was really shocked. I was like, what? Really? Because, of course, South Africans, anybody who's ever had anything to do with South Africans, we do have kind of an edge. And what was normal in South Africa was seen as all those things, harsh and aggressive and difficult in Australia. So I had to learn a different style. I had to learn, for example, humor. Australians use humor a lot to defuse things. South Africans, we are not known for our humor. We are not remotely funny people, actually, mostly. And so I had to learn those things. And every country that I went to, I got different feedback. I saw things in different ways. And so I think that it taught me to be a good listener because I really needed to see where people are coming from. And it taught me I remember early on, even when I looked like I was just a pushy, aggressive, upwardly mobile leader, I remember thinking, I need to connect with people's hearts. I can't, it's just not about logic. And it took me a while before I was brave enough to say things like that. Now these days I'll use the word love without any trouble. In those days, I was a little more covert, but I realized that if I could get that look in somebody's eye, if I could really make human connection, then the rest was possible. So, I think it's mobility that made a big difference. I think listening makes a big difference. And I think genuinely understanding, visceral, heart level, that organizations are made up of humans who've got parents and siblings and children and dogs and challenges in life. They're not corporate automatons. They're humans. And the more human we can be in business, the more successful.
And how did this piece of your leadership style shape up of looking things from a different perspective, say from a sustainability perspective, from a human perspective, to be a lot more loving, kind nature? Your wonderful TED talk about interdependence. So who we are is not a resultant of our own action, but a sum total of everything and everybody around us. So how did all of this come together and shape you to be the person that you eventually ended up being?
By the way, I don't think it's an eventually. I'm just emerging every day as you are. I think what I saw somewhere along the line is, if you look at little kids, do you have kids, Sri?
Yep, I do.
You do. How old are they?
2 girls.
How old are they?
2 girls, 14 and 10.
14 and 10. Okay, perfect. So when those little girls became little sort of individuated humans, little kids go through a stage of desire for mastery. And you try to help them, do their shoes. And they say, no, Daddy, I want to do it. And so then you stand there and you watch them stumble around doing the thing, But it's important for them to be able to master something. It's an important part of ego development. I think in business, we hold on to that desire way longer than is helpful. And we unconsciously, in businesses, carve up the world into little chunks that we can master. So if you take a P&L, for example, or balance sheet, it's a completely constructed concept, right? By the way, if you think about a P&L, it's just remarkable that the world that cannot agree on anything from, nuclear power to, human rights, can apparently agree globally on what is revenue, on what is profit, on what is debt. I mean, it's amazing that the world has come to an agreement about that for everyone. And we then carve it up into a little bucket. We call it a company. And then we make up regular reporting on our little job. And we completely ignore everything outside of the little job. It's effectively like your kids ignoring the fact that they made you wait for 3 hours while they're trying to do their shoes, because all they're thinking about is their own little project. And when you think about what that means at a sort of, scaled level, you have a leader who gets given a mission to run a business and to achieve a budget. And that person does not think about anything outside of that. And they create their entire activity around mastering this small chunk of what they've considered is their responsibility or their truth or their whatever you like. And the reality is that while carving up the world into little buckets is quite useful, because otherwise the world is overwhelming, we are part of an entire system, a remarkable system. A company, for example, has all sorts of inputs. If you're making food and beverage, as I did for much of my career, upstream, I've got farms and I've got literal water. I've got human beings who are converting things into things, and I was in the biscuit business, which I was for a long time. You've got farmers who are growing wheat, and that gets sent to a mill, and that it gets turned into flour, and then that gets put on a truck and it gets brought to my factory. That entire upstream thing is part of my system. And then I convert it into something, let's call it a biscuit, and I sell it to people. And all I care about is I sold it to people in the old-fashioned leadership. I sold it to people. It registered as revenue in my little box. And that's the end of that. The reality is downstream from me, I've got garbage because that thing's wrapped in something. I've got humans who are eating my biscuit, but maybe they've got obesity issues. Maybe they've got all sorts of other issues as a result of the thing that I'm selling. That's part of my responsibility too. And then if I take my actual humans in my actual company, in businesses, we call people FTEs. I've said this on so many podcasts. This phrase freaks me out. Full-time equivalents. They're not full. I mean, yes, but they're also humans. They've got parents and kids and lives and names. So what I kind of started to see was that when we carve the world up like that and we don't see beyond it, we don't tackle things that are more difficult. So here you and I are, you're in India, I'm in the United States. The things around us are overwhelming, all of them. The human rights issues, the environmental issues, the climate issues, overwhelming. And the only chance any of us have got of making a difference is of accepting that we need each other and that we can't solve them alone. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the subject.
That's so wonderful, coming from the hell to see things from that perspective. And that also kind of leads into something that you have been very passionately involved is about B Corp.
Yeah.
So you were part of B Corp, both driving B Corp in your organization as well as being an advisor to them. For the benefit of our listeners, if you can shed light on what B Corp, what was the sole purpose of its existence, and how did you kind of go about implementing this at Danone?
So B Corp, for anybody who's interested, you can go on the website, bcorporation.net. So it emerged about 20 years ago, and it was a creation of three guys who had sold a business that they had created, a shoe business, and they had sold it. They had built a great and sustainable business before its time, really, with good social benefits, good approach to recycling and sourcing and so on. And they sold it with a handshake agreement that those practices would continue. And 6 months later, the person they sold it to had abandoned everything and had just cut costs and, basically turned back the clock. And so they came up with the idea that there has to be a better way to measure business than the traditional P&L. And so they created a certification system. And if you go on the internet, if you go on the website, you can see there's a free tool called a B Impact Assessment. And you answer a series of questions about your company, and you'll get a kind of a sense of the kinds of things they're asking you. And while you have answers to many of those questions, there are other questions that you don't have answers to, but you've never actually even asked them. They're like, whoa, I never thought about the world like that. And so it's a really useful back of the envelope sort of inquiry into your business and what you're up to. If you decide you do want to become an actual B Corp, you send in your kind of score to them, and then they'll audit you. And if they decide that you have to reach 80 points out of 200 in order to get certification. And you can sort of choose how to double down. So I'll give you an example. If your entire business is run on renewable energy, you'll get a bunch of points. If your entire business is owned by employees, you'll get a bunch of points. But it's possible that if you're, for example, a consulting company and you don't have a lot of waste, you don't have a lot of environmental impact because you've only got humans, you can't get a lot of points for the kinds of things that a manufacturing company would get. But you can get a lot of points for how you treat your people. You can get a lot of points for how you do business, for the people that you do business for, and so on. So it allows you to have a sort of strategic approach to your impact. It's kind of like fair trade for business is probably the best way to say it. And the reason that I we became passionate about it. When I say we, that means me and my ex-boss, Emmanuel Faber, who was the global CEO of Danone, because it was the first certification system or the first metric system that we thought could really partner with the traditional P&L. Because big organizations are metric achieving systems. That's what we do. We know how to do things against a scorecard. That's one of the reasons that business has been so successful, because, humans like a scorecard. But the problem is if you're only measuring some things, you're not measuring other things, you're kind of lopsided, which is what business is. And so we pursued that system in Danone globally, and then I moved to the US because we had bought another big business in the US, and we were putting the two together, and we decided this was our opportunity to turn this new joint entity, a $6 billion entity in North America, into a B Corp, the biggest B Corp ever. And it was a fantastic journey because there are really sort of three big elements of this journey. The first is the legal frame, the legal form. Most organizations around the world are incorporated at a legal level as a C corporation or a version of that. Every country calls it something different. But it basically says my responsibility is to my shareholders, period. There is legislation in the US and in many other countries now, which is called generally benefit corporation legislation or something similar, where you're incorporated and you declare that you are responsible not only to your shareholders, but to a broader level of stakeholders. You're responsible to the community, you're responsible to your workers, you're responsible to the planet. You get to say what you've decided you want to be incorporated, what your statement is. But if you make your organization legally a benefit corporation, you are publicly, legally declaring that you have more stakeholders than just the people who lent you money, just your financial stakeholders. And it's an important practical and psychological element of creation of a business. So we did that. We put the two companies together, created a benefit corporation legislation, and then set off to become B Corp. And what was interesting about it, I said there were three things. There's the legal frame, there's the metrics themselves that get you over 80 points out of 200. But the third thing is you get a community. So, for example, Danone is a big food company. It's, traditional competitors are General Mills and, Chobani, people like that. In the B Corp journey, we became connected with people like Patagonia, with Ben & Jerry's, who's one, big activist organization, part of Unilever, with Davines and all sorts of really good companies that we could learn from. So it's not only a legal journey and a metrics journey, it's also kind of a sort of social journey. I'll tell you a story, Shri, that sort of demonstrates what I mean. There is an enormous amount of evidence that if you want to change at an individual level, anything, let's assume you want to be thinner. If you join a running club and you start to hang out with thin, fit people, you're likely to get thinner. So if you decided that you want to get really good at chess, it's a really great idea if you hang out with people who like chess. So the people that you spend your time with, the companies that you admire, they change the way you think. I'll give you a specific example of that. So it is 80 out of 200. It's good. It makes me remember that I haven't talked about this for a little while, but when we first became a B Corp, we got 81 points out of 200. And we were like, yay! We got over 80. And then I was talking to the CEO of Patagonia, who had become a friend. And in fact, she became the chair of our advisory committee. And I discovered that they had 165 points or something. I was like, oh, no, really? Okay. So then I said, okay, so I was pleased with myself that we were 81 because I was comparing myself with people who didn't make 80. Now I start to compare myself with people who've got double my score, right? Nearly double my score. And more than double my score. And I said, okay, now can you tell us, how you work? And then I discovered all sorts of things. For example, I discovered one of the biggest challenges with sustainability is the title and the remuneration of sustainability people. So you'll have a big corporation and you'll have a supply chain person who is an SVP who gets paid up here. and you've got a head of sustainability who is an associate director who gets paid this amount. And you put those two people in a room and you say, you have to decide where we source our flour. Well, you know who's going to win that battle. And this person's always got reasons why you don't want to change suppliers. It's almost always about money and history and experience and so on. So in Patagonia, they had done amazing work in reorganizing their org chart so that there was equal power, but also in the way they ran their meetings, like the way they managed to escalate decisions. It was completely different than ours, which was traditional. The people running the P&L had all the power, and the people who were trying to kind of make a difference in the world were like going, hi, can we talk about this? And, organizations don't work like that. So I learned so many things from hanging out with somebody who was doing it in a really good way. And so if I were listening to this podcast, one of the questions I would be asking myself is, well, what can I do? Where can I start? And I would go on the website to have a look at the B impact assessment and see how my organization works. But I would also look really carefully at who I've got in my organization doing what, and what message am I sending by how I'm paying people and how I'm labeling people, because actually you're sending huge messages about what matters to you by how you're doing all of that. And I would also look around me and I would say, who do I admire most in this space? And if it's not in the direct space that you're in, somebody close. Like, which company do I want to be like? And what can I learn from them?
No, that's a great way to kind of differentiate yourself from what you want to do and bolster your commitment to sustainability. And having said that, if you still look at it, there's still a minuscule number of organizations that has done this back. And part of the reason that I see why it is this is the perceived trade-off between focus on sustainability efforts versus financial performance. So how do you address that dichotomy in organizations? They mean to do good, but they're guarded by different set of parameters.
Yeah, I love this question, and I've got a few things to say about it. First of all, there is a huge move towards requiring these other metrics to be standard. So, for example, my ex-boss, the one I was talking about before, he's leading the charge in Europe to make carbon a declarable metric. So just as you have to declare your revenue under threat of, breaking the law, you're going to have to declare carbon. So I think there is that's just the first, and then there will be others. So I think the move ultimately to a balanced scorecard, let's call it, is going to be embedded in legal frame in many countries in the years to come, because that makes sense. So, I have this fantasy that on your average board, you'll have, as always, an audit committee, which is responsible for ensuring that the financials of an organization are properly measured and reported. You'll have a sustainability or an ESG or whatever you want to call it committee who will be ensuring that all of the other metrics that the organization is declaring, carbon, social justice metrics, recycling, renewable energy, whatever you want to call it, and so that they'll be matched. Because I do think that that's the big prize. But before then, one of the things that I think is a big myth is that we can only do one thing. So if you come back to parenting as an example, the entire journey of parenting is a trade-off between the long term and the short term. Every single conversation you have with your kid is you're mentally making the adjustment, right? The kid says, can I go out and play with my friends? Or instead of doing my homework, you're thinking to yourself, social development of the kid, having a good day versus being successful in the world and needing to study for her exams. So you're making that mental connection all the time. And sometimes you're saying, go and play with your friends. And sometimes you're saying, study. It's an art, not a science. We're making those in business all the time. I mean, you're making decisions about, let's take suppliers. Should I move to this supplier that I think is a better supplier because they're newer and they've got newer equipment? Or should I stick with my old one because we've got loyalty and I trust them? And we're making these instinctively, and then we're post-rationalizing them. I mean, I remember years ago moving the film. I was in the potato chip business in those days, moving the film from transparent to white because it would jump out on the shelf more. And I remember in the sort of navigation of the cost of it all, I had to make a completely, couldn't like test it with one line, with one product, because the premium that I'd have to pay for buying the white film just for one flavor didn't make sense relative to, So it was one of those things that we had to decide, are we going to move our entire line to white film, or are we going to do it the way we've always done it, which was buying transparent film and then inking on top? And I remember the backwards and forwards and should we do it? You could test it or whatever, eventually. At some point we said, just let's do this thing. We took a chance. We took a risk. That's what people are doing all the time. And, that was we had a little kind of financial model-y thing that said if we get an extra 5% growth, da-di-da. But you and I know those things are nonsense. They're just like made up, trying to make yourself feel better for decisions that you make as part of a business judgment. And the reason that I keep talking about perspective and broadening your perspective is if you genuinely think that all that matters is this little thing, this little P&L, you do make a set of decisions that are generally short-term and short-sighted. But if you genuinely understand that you're part of something much bigger than that, you're up for trying new and different things. And I'll give you another example of how this works, right? Or how I've seen it work. So years ago, pre-COVID, like the world is before COVID and after COVID, I'm sure it is for everybody. And I spent my life just going from company to company, talking to them about moving into B Corp certification and asking themselves bigger questions. And I had gone to see this company that made incredibly unsustainable things, like really complicated laminated plastic doodahs that go on the top of bottles and stuff. And somebody on their board had asked me to go and see them, and I had gone to see the CEO. And I remember the CEO was sitting there and he was kind of like looking at his watch, like, when's she going to leave? I'm just seeing her because I have to, but I'm not interested in this. I've got a business to run and this woman's wasting my time. This is not unusual. I had those kinds of conversations a lot. So I finished my pitch and I left. And about 6 months later, he called me up and he said, would you be up for coming to speak at the kickoff that I'm doing for a complete reinvention of our business at a sustainability level? I've got a consultant who used to work for Greenpeace who's leading the process, and I'd really like you to be there at the kickoff. Like, okay, that's interesting. So I said, okay. And I was intrigued. And I went there, and it was, one of those hotels that we went to before COVID, which I don't seem to go to those hotels anymore. Anyway, and I said to him, so I'm happy to be here, but I'm really intrigued. Like, what changed your mind? And he picked up his phone and he showed me a photograph of bits of plastic bobbing in the sea, which all of us have seen thousands of times. And it was a text message. And underneath it said, I hope you're proud of yourself, Dad. And he said to me, this is from my daughter. She's 22. And he choked up. And I still choke up when I think about the story. He said, I've spent my whole life trying to be a good dad, and she's ashamed of me. So he said, I don't know how to solve this, but I know that I'm in a position to start. I know that. And so he used his power to get all these people into this room to sort of start this journey of sustainability. And he was kind of fascinated by it because again, your point about the short-term, long-term thing, people in powerful positions in business are curious. They like new challenges. They like to work out new stuff. So they use it as an excuse. They're like, yeah, it's really difficult. Of course it's difficult. But anything that's interesting in the world is not easy. That's what humans are designed for. We're designed to do difficult things. So, every time everyone says that, I kind of go, yeah. But let's look. And let's look at all the areas you're making short-term and long-term trade-offs. And let's just remember that is what humans do. All of us. At all levels of us.
That's a wonderful anecdote to reinforce how you can make decisions, how you can still go over the trade-offs and make great decisions. And with all of this done, you have tasted a lot more success in this journey, and I'm sure you also had your share of challenges and frustrations. But if you were to go back and identify what has been your top strategy for success, what would they be?
So I was thinking about this the other day because somebody asked me the question of my privilege. Like, how do you deal with the fact that you're a well-educated white woman in a world where a lot of people don't have your privilege? And I think about that a lot. And I think about how lucky I am to have been born where I was born, to have been born in an English-speaking world, because it's a huge advantage to be an English speaker. I think it's an advantage. I have an advantage in so many areas of my life. One of the advantages that I have, and this might sound fake humble, but it's actually true, really true, is I'm not very good at a lot of things. I'm really not. I'm really not very good at finances. I'm really not very good at operational stuff. And so early on, I really, really knew that if I was going to be a good leader, I would need really good people. And I would need to get out of the way and let them help, let them do what they did. And as I see it now, I'm a coach now most of the time, a one-on-one coach. I see how painful it is for people to be very clever. Like I've got a couple of clients who are ex-consultants, consultants from McKinsey and BCG and those kinds of big fancy places with the really, really clever people. They struggle to lead because pretty much everyone they deal with is not quite as clever as they are. And so they are constantly, subtly kind of taking over. People, business is particularly the food business. It's not a sexy, glamorous business. It's a hard yards, day-to-day schlep. And so you want there's a sort of a joy in that day-to-day schlep. It's not about kind of intellectually dancing around the fabulous new decisions and all that. It's about making sure there's stock in the warehouse. It's about making sure that the people on the line are happy. It's about making sure that, the electricity didn't go out. It's very, very basic. And I think I kind of fell into that place early. I love the food business because it's so basic. I love how connected it is to the planet, to the earth. But I also really think that my need of people to work with me was one of my biggest helps. And it was just luck because I couldn't have done their jobs if I'd wanted to. So I think that's probably one of the things when I look back. And it was interesting. Somebody posted on LinkedIn the other day that I had many years ago. I was in a meeting apparently, and I had asked everybody in the meeting what their opinion was about the subject. And one of these young people, who was very junior at the time, was sort of touched by the fact that he had been asked his opinion. And so he was writing on the thing, what a good leadership skill it was or something. And I didn't remember the meeting at all. But I remember that I used to use that because I didn't know the answer. I wasn't asking them to be polite. I was asking them because I didn't know. And so I think people think, oh, what a nice leader. She asked my opinion. In brackets, she didn't really want it, but she asked it. No, I really wanted it, And also, I used to use that strategy all the time to buy time. If you think about, business works too fast for its own good. So, for example, if you asked me that question, I don't know the answer to that question. There is no answer. So I like a little time to just tune into myself and see what answer emerges for me. Business never gives you that time. So one of the strategies that I worked on early was I would go around the room, and ask people. And in that time, I not only gathered lots of interesting insight, but I gave my own system time to metabolize, And that's another thing. If I'm listening to this interview, I beg of you, all of you, slow down. business just thinks it's so clever to be fast. There are a few times when speed is good, medical emergencies, fires, that's important to move fast. But the rest of the time, anything important, sleep on it. Sleep on it. Allow your mind to settle. Get a good night's sleep. You wake up in the morning, it's like, ooh, I hadn't thought of that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of slowing down.
So there is a reason why it's called a sleep over it, so that you can kind of pause and then come back and think about it.
Absolutely. And, stay away from, like last night, just before I went to bed, I made the mistake of looking at my phone and there was an email and I was like, "Argh!" I was angry about the email. Put the phone down. I put the phone down as far away from me as possible. I actually plugged it in on the other side of the room just so that I could not be tempted to write my top of the head little response. And of course, this morning it all looks different to me. Yeah, sleep on it.
Howdy. So, Lorna, you being a big proponent of the sustainability mission, what specific practice or habit that you yourself have personally adapted in your day-to-day life? And how has that made a difference to you?
Oh, gosh, I love this question so much because I just put the garbage out. It's Monday morning here and it's garbage morning. And I'll tell you the thing that I struggle with the most. And then I'll tell you the things that I do that are quite useful. So the first thing is I have a dog. And if you have a dog in a city, like I do, you have to pick up their poop. And then you put it in a little bag and you tie a knot at the top. And then what do you do with it? You put it in the garbage. And I have been trying to work out what I can do differently about that because that breaks my heart. I've got like 10 little bags of dog poo went in the bin. And I want a solution to that. Now people, yes, there are biodegradable bags. In my particular case, there are people in my neighborhood that still get newspapers in plastic bags. So I asked them to give me their bag and I use the bag. But that's still not solving the problem. And I want somebody to solve the problem of poop in a bag because I don't know how to solve that problem. So that's one of the ones that really, really, really bothers me. And I'm hoping that somebody comes up with some solution because I love my dog so very much that I will sacrifice anything else to be able to do that for him. But what do I think about a lot at a personal level? The first is I'm really a huge fan of growing food and getting food from people who grow it. So, for example, here in my neighborhood, there is a system called the community share agreement, where at the beginning of the year, you pay money to the farmers and the farmers plant their crops. And then once a week, you go with your own box and you get whatever it is that they grew and you eat it. And then you go, the next week. So that means I'm supporting agriculture. I'm not getting any plastic or packaging in my food. It also means that I'm getting, obviously, organic and really good food, but it also means I get really unusual food. Like I take you get whatever they grew. And sometimes I look in that box and I think, I don't even know what that thing is, but I'm going to eat it. So I think anywhere, and we also have a little garden here. And we plant and we grow as much of our own vegetables and food as we can. I'm a vegan. I don't eat any animal products of any kind. So that, I think, has an impact on the environment. And it also has an impact on packaging and other byproducts. I mean, there's a bunch of upstream benefits of veganism. It's also a personal benefit for me. I feel much better as a vegan than I used to when I ate meat. I think the second sort of big area, so I'm trying to sort of behave better in the food upstream, downstream area. I think there's a huge opportunity around apparel, clothing. Clothing is one of the most horrific impacts on the planet, everything from water usage to human rights abuses to waste. I saw a statistic the other day, can't remember exactly what the statistic is, but like 40% of all clothes go from being manufactured to landfill within a year. They don't even so I barely buy anything. In fact, I made a commitment to a guy called Josh Spodek, who's a really radical environmentalist. He lives in New York City off the grid. I've never met anybody who lives in New York City off the grid. He doesn't have a refrigerator. He has a little solar panel to do his computer, but he doesn't have heating. He doesn't have air conditioning. It's remarkable. And I made a commitment to not buy any new items of clothing or shoes for a year. And then I did it for 2 years. And now I don't, I don't have that commitment, but I cannot remember the last time I bought anything new. And I do think that the sort of shopping obsession, it's a complete waste. And I think buying from sustainable people, for example, there's a magnificent organization in this country called Another Tomorrow that has a really traceable environmental footprint for its clothing. So there are people who are better or worse on the clothing front that I think are it's important. Third thing is I'm just getting solar panels put into this house. But one of the biggest challenges we have here is insulation. It's a very cold part of the country in the winter. So I want to do a whole bunch of work on insulation to make sure that my kind of, that I have a renewable energy source. So, those are the things that come to my mind. And then I have other habits that offset that. I already talked about my dog. But then there are other things that I do that break my heart. So, for example, I'm out here. We do need a car out here. And so, when I go to the city, I use public transport all the time. But out here in the country, you need a car. I try and use the car as little as possible, but car usage. So, I don't think any of us are perfect at all. Oh, garbage, pick up garbage every day anytime I see it. But I think it's important to just notice, notice and do stuff, small stuff, and ask yourself hard questions. And I'm hoping that somebody's going to give me an answer to the dog poo problem.
Hopefully, of the many listeners who are listening to this, they may just pop in a recommendation or an advice. So here we are with Lorna Davis, the champion of sustainability and environment, talking to us. And here we are in the Power of 3 round. The first of the Power of 3 round question, Lorna, coming to you. 3 pieces of advice that you would give to your older self.
Keep stretching, learn something new all the time, and be surprised by who you've become.
How do you practice number 2, learn something new every day?
I'm willing to be bad at things. I think one of the reasons we don't want to learn things is we don't like to be bad at them, and I'm willing to be bad at them.
3 micro experiments that can bolster awareness of sustainability.
Pick up the first 5 pieces of garbage you see every day and find a bin to put them in. Spend a week without eating any animal products. Set yourself a challenge to throw away the smallest possible bag of garbage that you can for the next month.
Nice. 3 book or podcast recommendations.
The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. Winners Take All by Ananjiri Daradas. And the On Being podcast by Krista Tippett.
Lorna, if you could have a dinner party with 3 environmental activities or sustainability leaders, who would you invite and why?
I would invite Greta Thunberg, of course, because I would be so intrigued by how she is, what she thinks, how much courage she has. I would Christina Figueres, and I would ask her how to make a difference at scale at the sort of, UN WEF level. And I would have David Attenborough to talk about what he has seen in his life around the degradation of the planet and what advice he has for this generation.
And taking that cue, if I were to ask you the next question, if you could choose 3 eco-friendly destinations to travel, where would it be and what sustainable activities would you want to be exploring there?
I would take a kayak trip down the Connecticut River, which is just over here. So I would be able to actually kayak there and kayak up the river. And I would see how I could live without any kind of energy of any kind except the energy of my own arms on the kayak. I've always wanted to do that, and I think it would be cool, and I'm a terrible kayaker, but I could get better if I did that. I would really like to go to Montana. I have never been to Montana, and I would like to take the train there, and I would like to see bison in Montana. So I'd like to see something about, I've never seen a bison either. So I would like to see something about bison in Montana. And then, because of course, environmentally friendly means I'm not flying anywhere. And so the third place that I would go is, I would really, so maybe I'd do it on the same trip as Montana. I would go to Utah. I've been to Utah before, but I'd like to actually learn to canyon. You know, when you go down those canyons and you have to kind of find your way through the little boulders like that. I think I'd like to learn to do that. So those are the three things. And in fact, I'm really glad you asked me those three questions because I could do all of those things in the next 2 years.
Nice. That's something that you should be telling your older self and go for it.
Absolutely.
You have been a proponent of giving purpose to a lot of the organizations. For folks who are listening to this conversation, if they were to kind of have a way to find meaningful purpose for their own lives, how can they go about finding that purpose?
So I'm choosing to take my time to answer this one, Sri, because I genuinely believe that your purpose in the world is informed by what personally and deeply touches you. And all of us are different. And I think, I can't remember who it was who said, you know, don't ask what the world needs of you. Ask what brings you alive, because what the world needs is people who are alive, who are brought alive. So in a settled time, ask yourself, what deeply moves me? You know, I use the expression, what breaks my heart? But there are other ways of expressing it. Where am I deeply touched? And that place, and everybody knows it, deep down under all the noise, under all the trying, under all the justifications, everybody knows the place that moves them. That's the place for you to act. Start somewhere, anywhere. Take one step, just one step in that direction. And because it's your karma, it's your path, it'll unfold for you one step at a time. So, you know, one of the things that breaks my heart is so many of my clients come to me trying to overthink their purpose. They're ending up doing things that they don't really want to do because they're trying too hard. We're all different. We're all part of this big web, and your own heart is leading you. Just settle down and listen to it. Listen to it whispering, because it's not screaming. Normally it doesn't scream. So that's what I'd say.
Beautiful. Listen to those whispers. Finally, Lorna, how do you want to be remembered?
That's so funny. A friend came for dinner on Friday night and I made soup. And she texted me the second day, on Saturday, and she said, oh, that soup was wonderful. And I said, you know, when I die, people will remember my soup. I make good soup, Shri, really good soup. And that would be good enough for me, right? People will remember. Because in my soup, I'm showing that I love you. And so cooking basic, warming, hearty, nourishing food is a gift that I hope people will remember me for.
How nice and wonderful. You're bringing all the ingredients of everything that we spoke. The warmth, the love, the nature, sustainable, all of it.
Yeah.
Everything packed in a soup.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Lorna, this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. We had such an amazing, wonderful talk. Before we sign off, anything that you would want to let our listeners know?
No, if anybody wants to continue the conversation, you can always find me on LinkedIn or on my website, which is lornadavis.net. And I'm happy to engage with anybody about anything.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Inspire Someone Today. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off. Until next time, Continue to carry the ripples of inspiration. Stay inspired, keep spreading the light.